Today's tech news moves fast, but understanding it shouldn't be hard. That's why Snarful Solutions Group brings you Connecting the Dots, where we break down what's happening in tech and why it matters to you. Now, let's dive in with your hosts.
Welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm Alex.
And I'm Morgan.
Today, the U.S. government is, they're essentially changing the locks on the internet, and your living room is caught right in the middle of it.
Yeah, it's a massive shift. We're looking at a sweeping new Federal Communications Commission ban on foreign-made routers. It's a regulatory action that kind of forces us to rethink every piece of connected hardware sitting in our homes right now.
Exactly. We're going to examine how a seemingly harmless piece of plastic can act as like a Trojan horse for global espionage.
And we'll break down the monumental and honestly perhaps unprecedented logistical mountain the tech industry now has to climb to bring manufacturing back on shore.
But first, it is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, and we are broadcasting live from the Snarful Solutions Group right here in sunny Sacramento, California.
It is definitely sunny.
Oh, it really is. Before we map out the future of your home network, let's get you caught up on the morning essentials. Grab your sunglasses if you are stepping out locally today, because Sacramento is looking at a beautiful, clear high of 87 degrees.
Yeah, but that heat is certainly not staying localized. An early season heat wave continues to push aggressively across the central and western U.S. We're talking high temperatures approaching 90 degrees, stretching all the way from Texas up to the Ohio Valley.
Which is pretty wild for March. But if you're trekking hazardous weather, the picture is vastly different up north.
Oh, yeah.
The Pacific Northwest has heavy rain and mountain snow moving in tomorrow. And listeners in the Northeast, you need to prep for a very messy end of the week. There are severe thunderstorms and a highly disruptive wintry mix hitting on Thursday and Friday.
So definitely a volatile week for weather, which actually stands in stark contrast to the financial markets.
Right.
The indices experienced a slight uniform cooling off yesterday. The Dow Jones closed down 0.60% at 45,822.43.
It's a little dip.
Yeah, and the S&P 500 followed that broader trend, dipping by 0.21% to close at 6,532.27.
And Bitcoin mirrored the traditional markets too, right?
It did, sliding slightly by 0.40% to settle at 70,613.07.
So, a quiet day on Wall Street, but an incredibly loud day at the ballpark for San Francisco fans.
Absolutely.
The Giants delivered a completely dominant 10-2 victory over the Sultanes de Monterrey yesterday. Tristan Beck was highly efficient on the mound to secure the win as the pitcher, while Casey Schmidt helped power the offense, going 2 for 3 at the plate.
That is a solid foundation for the week.
It really is. And if you need help building your own foundation this morning, our sponsor has the perfect upgrade for your daily routine. This morning's show is brought to you by Strong Coffee. Most of us rely on a morning cup just to function, but Strong Coffee actually puts in the heavy lifting. It is a premium instant coffee that delivers the rich, complex taste of a traditional fresh brew, but it is packed with 15 grams of protein, MCTs, and adaptogens like ashwagandha.
The inclusion of adaptogens is the real differentiator for productivity. You get clean, sustained energy to power through complex projects without the sharp crash or the mid-morning jitters associated with standard caffeine spikes.
Streamline your morning and get more out of your cup. Use promo code SNARFUL for 20% off your entire purchase at strongcoffeecompany.com. That is promo code SNARFUL for 20% off.
All right, let's jump into our first story from today's Morning Star.
Yes, let's do it.
So the Snarful Tech article report tracks the most critical technological movements globally, and today's lead story represents a fundamental rewriting of the rules for consumer electronics.
It really does. So to break it down simply, the United States government, operating through the FCC, has officially banned the import and sale of all new foreign-made consumer-grade internet routers.
Right.
These devices have now been formally added to the FCC's covered list.
This is a big deal.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And this regulatory action stems directly from a national security determination issued by the Trump administration this past Friday. They basically concluded that these foreign manufactured devices present an unacceptable risk to U.S. cybersecurity and supply chain integrity.
Yeah, and the rationale driving this sweeping policy is rooted in several specific, highly sophisticated cyber campaigns. These were operations that successfully compromised U.S. infrastructure between 2024 and 2025.
The Typhoon ones, right?
Exactly. Government investigations identified persistent operations known as Volt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, and Salt Typhoon.
And the official attribution for those operations points to state-sponsored actors linked to or operating on behalf of the Chinese government.
Correct.
The administration's stated position is that these campaigns deliberately exploited vulnerabilities in foreign-made routers to execute espionage, disrupt critical networks, and we're talking communications, energy grids, water systems, and to extract intellectual property.
Yeah, and to really understand the severity of the government's response, we have to look at the mechanical reality of what a router actually does.
Yeah.
I mean, it is not just a passive box blinking in the corner of your office providing a Wi-Fi signal.
Right. The way I like to think about it, it operates as a highly privileged digital customs agent at the front door of your digital house.
That's a great analogy.
Because think about it. Every single packet of data your family or business generates, your sensitive emails, banking credentials, internal video calls, it all has to be inspected and routed by that specific piece of hardware before it hits the open internet.
Yep.
And if the lock on your front door or that customs agent is compromised by the factory where they were built, they can be programmed to quietly wave malicious traffic right through the border. Or, secretly copy your outgoing data and send it to an unauthorized server.
Exactly. And a hardware-level compromise is incredibly difficult to detect.
Why is that?
Because it exists beneath the software layer that most commercial security programs even monitor. Like, imagine an assembly line in a massive industrial park where tens of thousands of circuit boards are being printed daily.
Okay.
The vulnerability isn't necessarily some massive, obvious spy chip. It can be incredibly subtle. Well, a supplier might alter the firmware flashing process so that the router's base bootloader contains a microscopic vulnerability. Or a subcontractor modifies the random number generator on the encryption chip, which makes cryptography mathematically predictable to a threat actor.
Wow. And
Yeah.
because modern routers contain millions of lines of code and hundreds of surface-mounted components, auditing every single device coming off an overseas line is mathematically and physically impossible for U.S. regulators.
Completely impossible.
So the administration's policy relies on the premise that distance creates vulnerability. If the physical hardware is manufactured in a facility outside of U.S. jurisdiction, the supply chain itself becomes an active, unmanageable threat vector.
Right. You simply cannot audit an assembly line you do not control.
Exactly. Which forces a radical reevaluation of the global market. I mean,
Yeah.
the mandate against foreign-made routers effectively captures the entire consumer networking industry.
It really does. Virtually all consumer routers sold in the United States today are manufactured overseas. The bulk of production is centralized in China, Taiwan, and Vietnam.
Which brings into focus our second story from the Morning Star. The sheer scale of the brand impact here.
Yeah, who gets caught in the net?
Right, because the FCC policy does not merely target foreign-owned corporations, it casts a massive net over American companies that rely on overseas assembly too.
Yeah.
We can look at two major players navigating this friction today. Let's start with TP-Link. If you search for networking gear online right now, they are a dominant, top-selling brand.
Oh, absolutely. TP-Link commands a massive share of the U.S. market. But their historical origins in China have placed them under an intense regulatory microscope following those Typhoon cyber incidents.
Right.
They actually recognized the shifting geopolitical winds early, and they engaged in a highly aggressive corporate restructuring to mitigate this exact scenario.
Yeah, the timeline of their maneuvering is honestly fascinating. They formally severed ties with their Chinese parent entity in 2022.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. Moving intellectual property, establishing separate data governance, all of that. Then they set up a new global headquarters in California in 2024. And then the corporate drama peaked in 2025 when they took their American competitor Netgear to court. TP-Link alleged that Netgear was running a marketing and lobbying campaign suggesting TP-Link products were actively infiltrated by the Chinese government.
Right, it got very messy. And today, TP-Link routes its U.S.-bound manufacturing through Vietnam.
But all of that restructuring still leaves them vulnerable to the new FCC rule, right?
Yes, exactly. Because the final assembly still occurs outside the United States. And honestly, Netgear finds themselves in a similarly precarious position, despite being a U.S.-headquartered company with a long legacy of domestic design.
Yeah, and Netgear actually issued a public statement commending the administration's national security focus. They leaned heavily on their American innovation and a, quote, security-first design philosophy.
Sure.
But the structural problem for Netgear is that while the architecture is designed in Silicon Valley, the physical manufacturing of the plastic and silicon takes place in Taiwan and Vietnam.
Right.
Under the strict parameters of the covered list expansion, a domestically designed router assembled in Taiwan poses an unacceptable risk for new product authorization.
because the policy draws a hard physical boundary. The intellectual property and the software design matter less to the regulators than the geographic coordinates of the factory floor.
Oh, wait, this is where I have a question. This seems to expose a massive logical blind spot in the policy when we evaluate it against the government's own forensic data.
Oh, the DOJ report.
Yes. The Department of Justice released a comprehensive report detailing the mechanics of the Volt Typhoon hack, which is literally the foundational justification for this entire ban.
Right.
The DOJ specifically documented that the hackers breached U.S. networks by targeting older router models designed by American companies, specifically Cisco and Netgear.
That's a brilliant point, yeah.
So does forcing the physical manufacturing to Texas actually solve a software update problem?
Well, no. The DOJ findings highlight a critical split in cybersecurity philosophy, right? It's supply chain vulnerabilities versus software lifecycle vulnerability.
Yeah. Okay, break that down for us.
So the operations known as Volt Typhoon utilize advanced techniques to establish persistent access. They engaged in what the cybersecurity community calls living off the land.
Meaning what?
Blending into normal network traffic by using the router's own built-in administrative tools against it. But the infiltration vector was not a malicious microchip covertly installed at a foreign factory.
Right, it was software rot.
Exactly. The U.S. companies had discontinued those specific router models and ceased pushing out security patches. The hardware was functioning exactly as intended by the factory, but the software lifecycle had ended.
So mandating that a company physically screw the plastic casing together in Texas does absolutely nothing to force that same company to provide firmware updates 5 years down the line.
Precisely. Forcing manufacturing to domestic soil addresses the factory floor. It prevents a device from arriving compromised out of the box.
But a secure supply chain cannot compensate for an abandoned software lifecycle. It's like digital WD-40.
I like that.
A brand new lock might be perfectly secure the day it leaves the American factory. But over time, new lock-picking techniques are invented by threat actors. If the manufacturer stops sending out the digital WD-40, the regular security patches the lock eventually rusts and becomes trivial to bypass.
Yep.
The Volt Typhoon actors scanned the internet, found unpatched, abandoned routers, and simply walked through the front door.
Yeah, so a router stamped with Made in the USA provides no long-term security guarantee if the manufacturer sunsets the product support 3 years after purchase. The ban hardens the initial point of sale while leaving the long-term maintenance window entirely unregulated.
So if fixing the factory floor doesn't entirely solve the software issue, it kind of leaves you, the listener, trying to figure out what hardware is actually allowed in your home moving forward.
Which brings us to our third story.
Exactly. The immediate impact on your living room and the staggering logistical challenge of reshoring tech manufacturing. Because if you are sitting at home right now looking at the little black box blinking in your hallway, you do not need to unplug it and throw it away.
No, definitely not. The regulatory language provides very clear boundaries here. The FCC relies on the definition established in NIST Internal Report 8425A, which specifically categorizes consumer-grade routers intended for residential use.
Right.
The ban strictly applies to new hardware models seeking future FCC authorization.
So existing devices are grandfathered in. Furthermore, retailers who have warehouses full of previously authorized stock from TP-Link, Netgear, or ASUS, they can legally continue to sell that inventory to consumers.
Yeah, the policy is designed to choke off the future pipeline of foreign hardware, not to orchestrate a mass confiscation of active devices.
But the survival of these hardware companies now hinges on their ability to navigate a very narrow, highly scrutinized regulatory loophole, right?
Yes, the exemption process. Manufacturers can petition for conditional approval to bypass the ban and bring new products to market.
But the authority granting that approval does not reside with the FCC.
Yep.
Companies have to secure exemptions directly from the Pentagon or the Department of Homeland Security.
Which is intense.
Very. And the prerequisites for that exemption demand full transparency regarding any foreign investors, coupled with a strict, time-bound, verifiable plan to transition their entire manufacturing apparatus into the United States.
And we really have to comprehend the gravity of implementing a time-bound plan to reshore manufacturing. I mean, the modern tech supply chain is an intricate web spanning dozens of countries.
It's massive.
A single router contains a CPU, RAM, flash memory, radio frequency amplifiers, antennas, and power regulation modules. Currently, the raw materials, the rare earth metals, The specific grades of industrial plastic are extracted, processed, and refined predominantly in Asia.
And then the semiconductor fabrication plants churning out the Wi-Fi chips are located in Taiwan or South Korea.
Exactly.
The specialized workforce trained to operate the complex pick-and-place machines that assemble these microscopic components on the motherboard, I mean, that number's in the millions overseas.
Yeah, so the capital expenditure to replicate this is astronomical. You cannot simply lease an empty warehouse in Ohio, import a few machines, and begin stamping out complex networking equipment at scale.
No, you have to build the entire vertical stack from the ground up.
Which is why the regulatory agencies pointed to Starlink, the satellite internet division of SpaceX, as a primary example of successful domestic production. They noted that Starlink currently manufactures Wi-Fi routers at their facility in Texas.
Right, but Starlink operates with a massive advantage through extreme vertical integration. They control nearly every aspect of their supply chain.
They are a huge outlier.
Yeah, in a consumer market where the standard operating procedure has always involved outsourcing assembly to the lowest bidder.
Well, when we connect the regulatory actions over the past few months, a clear blueprint really emerges. This router ban does not exist in a vacuum.
Not at all.
Last December, the FCC implemented an identical sweeping ban on all future foreign-made drones. That effectively locked DJI, the dominant global drone manufacturer, out of introducing new consumer products into the United States.
So the overarching trend here is an aggressive, forced onshoring of critical technology infrastructure. The government has calculated that the immense economic disruption and the likely increased consumer costs associated with rebuilding supply chains domestically, well, that's just an acceptable price to pay for hardening national security.
Exactly. The tech industry is being forced into a massive balancing act, scrambling to reconstruct physical supply lines without completely pricing the average consumer out of the market.
And even if they successfully move every assembly line to the Midwest, they still face the monumental task of ensuring consumers actually hit the update button when the software inevitably needs patching.
Because security remains a continuous, active process. It demands vigilance on the assembly line, rigorous maintenance of the code base, and proactive participation from the end user.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up today's coverage, here's one more thing to know. We spend a lot of time analyzing the hardware, routing the internet into your home, but your physical gear deserves just as much attention, especially if you are shopping for a tech enthusiast who also happens to be a massive music or sports fan.
Finding apparel that intersects with those specific interests can be really difficult, which is why Old Glory is such a valuable resource.
Old Glory is an iconic merch store boasting an incredibly deep catalog of officially licensed gear. Whether you are hunting for vintage classic rock tees, specialized sports apparel, or a unique piece that perfectly captures your personality, their inventory is just unmatched. It is the ideal destination to find a highly personalized gift for a friend or to just upgrade your own wardrobe.
And we have a great opportunity for our listeners to explore their collection. When you are ready to check out, use the promo code SNARFL and you will receive 15% off your entire purchase.
That is 15% off everything in your cart. Just navigate over to oldglory.com and remember to apply that promo code SNARFL.
Awesome. So let's briefly recap the 3 major takeaways from today's Morning Star for everyone managing their business networks or their family's tech stack. First, the U.S. government has initiated an unprecedented ban on new foreign-made consumer routers, classifying the overseas supply chain as an unacceptable national security risk following major cyber campaigns attributed to state actors.
Second, this policy forces a massive logistical restructuring for industry titans like TP-Link and Netgear. The government is strictly regulating the physical origin of the hardware, despite forensic evidence showing that abandoned software life cycles, the failure to patch older devices remain an equally critical vulnerability that this physical ban does not address.
And third, your current residential network is safe from regulatory interference. Existing routers and previously approved retail stock are exempt from the ban. However, as you map out your technology upgrades over the next several years, expect the entire consumer electronics market to fundamentally shift toward a domestic manufacturing standard.
Yeah, a regulatory shift of this magnitude leaves us with a critical lingering thought for the week. The FCC aggressively expanded its covered list to ban foreign-made drones last December. Today, they dropped the hammer on foreign-made home Wi-Fi routers.
It makes you wonder what's next.
Exactly. As the definition of unacceptable risk continues to broaden, look around your living room. From the smart thermostat regulating your HVAC, to the connected baby monitor, to the voice assistant sitting on your kitchen counter, what everyday connected device is going to be the next target on the government's list?
I guarantee you, every hardware manufacturer with overseas assembly lines is scrambling to answer that exact question this morning.
We're here to help at Snarful, so reach out on our website if you have any more questions.
That's a wrap on today's top stories. Remember, tech doesn't have to be complicated, and we're here to help connect the dots. If you've got questions or want to learn more, visit us at snarful.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.